And so that's also the topic of our first panel discussion today, whether the superpower India could be Europe's best friend in the future.
Let me start with the paradox. India is today's world's largest democracy, most populous country, a global IT power hub, and a space tech success story, and a member of both G20 and BRICS, often called the next superpower. But still there is a gap in understanding between India and Europe, because India's GDP is rising fast, and the per capita income remains very modest. It rolls out red carpet of global leaders from Russia to Europe within few days, and it speaks the language of Global South, partnering with West. So the big question is, are we truly understanding each other? Let's unpack this together. I'll start with Sujeet. India today hosts European leaders with warmth, engages with US strategically, and maintains relations with Russia, even in difficult times. Who is India's best friend today? Can Europe truly expect strategic alignment from India?
Good afternoon, and deeply honored and delighted to be in this beautiful city of Hamburg. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to visit the city council, the mayor's office, and I learned that the city of Hamburg has sister city partnerships with 9 cities across the globe. I'm looking for the day when we'll have a sister city partnership with one of our port cities and Hamburg. But nevertheless, it's a beautiful, sunny, weather that we have. Thank you, FNF, for inviting me. Can we have the first slide of Stefan's presentation? That also will answer.
The rising India?
The first slide, the very first slide which Stefan had in his presentation. Yeah. Okay, so while it comes, this is the last. Perfect. No, the one before this. To answer Nupur's question, I'll have to, read that out. Europe's best friend. I have an 18-year-old son, and he, as any teenager, uses this lingo, this social media lingo. So he always uses BFF, best friend forever. So Stefan, I would request you to, edit your tagline, Europe's best friend forever. So that would actually define India-Europe partnership, and I completely agree with our Consul General, Madam Gupta, when she said that India-Europe in general and India-Germany in particular, the friendship between India-Europe and India-Germany would be one of the most defining partnerships of the 21st century. And I've always maintained this. In fact, I did say this in Brussels. I've always said this. This is a partnership, this is a friendship, this is a cooperation waiting to happen. Yes, I do not remember the exact line, but our foreign minister, Dr. Jaishankar, in his book, which he published a couple of years ago, he has a very famous line in that book. India has to engage US, manage US, engage Europe, reassure Russia, and have good relationship with its neighbor and China and so on and so forth. Not exactly the line, but on those lines. So our declared foreign policy doctrine is strategic autonomy and multi-alignment. Many of you would know that after independence in 47, we consciously pursued the policy of non-alignment. When the world was divided into 2 camps during the Cold War, we chose the policy of non-alignment along with President Tito and Prime Minister Sukarno of Indonesia and few other world leaders. We have moved from that policy today to a policy of multi-alignment. So everyone is our friend. We want to build partnerships with every major pole, every major country on the basis of mutual respect, on the basis of mutual prosperity. But our strategic autonomy, our independence, that is non-negotiable, and that will not be compromised. So today our defense minister is in Germany as we speak, and Madam Gupta will agree that on any given week, you have a high-level delegation in Germany, and that could be true of every country in Europe. So I think, there are mutualities, there are complementarities. She spoke about the 6 pillars between India and Germany, which I can reframe it in a different way. I can call it the 4 Ds, because my Prime Minister loves to give acronyms. So digitization, democracy, demography, and decarbonization. Both Stefan's presentation and Professor Dr. Thomas' presentation and your keynote spoke of many numbers. I'll just elaborate on few. Democracy, 960 million is the number of voters that we had in the last election of 2024. That was there in your presentation, Stefan. That is almost 1 billion voters, of which 70% actually voted. 700 million Indians exercised their franchise. 700 millions. We had more than 1 million polling booth. More than 1 million polling staff were engaged. And in less than 36 hours, we had the outcome. On 1st of June 2024, the election at 7 p.m., the elections voting got over. And on 4th of June, we had the results. 700 million votes in less than, and more than 1 million EVM machines were used. So these are numbers. So why do I talk of democracy? Because it's the largest democracy, and some argue it's the oldest democracy on earth. Because of Europe's values aligned with our values. It's value alignment. We are talking of human rights. We are talking of rule of law. We are talking of rules-based order. When the world is in conflict, which are the 2 geographies which actually have value alignment? It's Europe and India. Today, we talk of world order, global order. But where is that order? Let me give the example of maritime. We have many maritime laws. UNCLOS is there. But tell me, I don't want to name that nation because, it might not be palatable here. But you have, these maritime laws being broken more often than being practiced. And because we are in a law school, and I'm a lawyer myself, and the first principle of jurisprudence that was taught in my law school was that what deters crime is not the quantum of punishment, but rather the certainty of punishment, right? So, for example, in India, I always argue that what will deter rape crime is not giving death penalty to rapists, where the conviction rate is less than 4%, but rather giving 2 years imprisonment, but making sure that 100% conviction is there for the rapist. That will deter rape more than any other thing. And similarly with international law, you have a country which is flagrantly violating law. You have, the 2016 dispute between Philippines and China. One country refuses to abide by the Permanent Court of Arbitration ruling. And then we talk of rules-based order. So, value alignment. Second is demography. She gave the statistics that over 50% of India's population is under 25. That itself is 700 million. 2/3 of India's population are under 35. That is 1 billion. 1 billion Indian is under 35. Indians are under 35. So just imagine the opportunity that entails for Europe and India, for talent, for bringing in the right kind of talent and immigration to Europe, not as a burden to Europe. And the other day, the German ambassador to India told me that Indians are considered to be good immigrants. I was pleased to hear that from the German ambassador to India. And that can be said of any other country as well. I've lived in Switzerland, I've lived in US, and Indians are generally considered to be good immigrants there. Decarbonization, she again spoke of green growth and sustainability. We have an ambitious target of net zero by 2070. My Prime Minister has articulated this goal. Probably the only developing country to have a very clear deadline of reaching net zero goals. And here we want to cooperate with Germany and other countries of Europe to help us in our sustainability efforts. And finally, digitization. Half of the world's real-time digital transactions happen in India. I'll ask the audience to guess a number. Can you tell how many real-time digital transactions happens in India every single day? Just a guess. I show you a gift if you can guess it correctly, or at least a close approximation. How many? 500 million or billion? Million. 900 million. Slightly less than that. almost 700 million transactions every single day. And when I tell these numbers to my European friends, or my American friends, it takes them a couple of minutes to even comprehend this number. Every single day. Last year in 2025, there was 200 billion real-time digital transactions in India. You know, this is the digitization that we are talking of. When she spoke of human-centric, I don't know if it was you or it was Professor Dr. Thomas, when either of you spoke of the human-centric digitization, you know, imagine this is the scale that we bring to the table. Imagine the potential for technological collaboration, for collaboration in AI, semiconductor, emerging technologies, you know, and whatnot. You know, we are talking of AI for social good. Which other country will offer this kind of scale and scope?
Yeah.
So these are the opportunities that I see between Europe and India, and I reiterate what she said and what I said at the beginning, that this is the time. This is the time for India.
Sujeet, we will talk about the values.
And just last point.
Yeah, sure.
And that also got reflected in the presentation and in the survey. 74% of Indians have favorable view of Europe. Do you know what that number is for the US? 15. 15. With due respect to my American friends, this is the lack of trust that Indians have about the US. And this is the trust that Indians have about Europe. That rests my point.
Thank you so much, Sujeet. We will talk about labor migration as well as values. It's a very important topic for us. I would come to Mr. Erik. From the European perspective, let's be honest here, is Europe still trying to fit India into its traditional foreign policy lens, or is it ready to accept India as a different kind of partner? For example, India won't align on sanctions. India prioritizes strategic autonomy. So do you think that Europe is ready to partner, which does not always agree, but still matters?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm really very happy to be here because India is kind of, the British would say, the jewel in the crown in the department that I'm leading in Brussels on the Asia Pacific. And I just started coming from the German Foreign Ministry in January this year, and the first major engagement that we had was the trip to New Delhi by the President of the Commission, the President of the Council, the head of the European External Action Service for that summit, which cemented what you also mentioned is called the mother of all deals. And I think it's important to say that this is not just a figure of speech here, but really a mother for many, many other deals that have also been agreed upon during these days and others that we are preparing. I think that wouldn't have been possible without seeing India as it is and without having a discussion among European member states whether they wanted to agree to have a different approach to India than we might have had in the past. I remember my own work in New Delhi from 2007 to 10, so a long time ago. But already then, everybody said India does have the potential to be one of our strongest partners, but this potential is not being tapped. Why was it not being tapped? Because it was easier to work with other countries, and it might have been easier at that time for India to go without Europe, with the cooperation with the US. It was very successful. And I think now India is not standing before a choice. It's just a diversification of partners, as it is for us. And I think it's important to see it in this bigger context that Europe has an Indo-Pacific strategy, which says that basically we are taking a different look at a whole region that is very far away, but that is very important for us as it has the most important supply lines for the European industry, that it has partners like India, but also I would mention Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, that are democracies that share at least parts of our values, parts of our international ambitions, and that understand us as we are. I think there's a lot of shades of gray here that are not necessarily always factored in when we talk about EU-Indian relations. I think the the relative knowledge of each other, respective knowledge of each other, could be much bigger. We have seen just the survey, which was really very interesting. I would like to see a survey like that from the other side, because I think that there's still an image of the other that sometimes comes into play here that might hinder us from actually going into the concrete discussion of topics where we do not always see eye to eye, and it's also part of the truth that we need to live with that, and to discuss this in a way that allows us to go beyond this point and then to work on other issues where we do see eye to eye. And I think it is important in that context to say that yes, Russia is there, and yes, India has a relationship with Russia that is historically founded, that has understandable reasons. It's also materially understandable. I mean, if most of the armament of the Indian army still comes from Russia, then there is a certain dependency also. But what can be our answer? Should it be, no, you're not allowed to do that? That will not be successful. The answer must be, we make better offers. And that's what we've been trying over the past few years. That's what we will be doing in the future as well. We will try to give an alternative to India in many areas, not only armament. And we hope to get an alternative from India for other partners that we are losing at the time. And we need lots of best friends, I would say. One best friend would be very nice. It's not very likely in politics. So I think just saying we are good partners and we are trusted partners to each other who do not only look at our bilateral relationship, but also beyond that to give an alternative to other countries as well in acting with them together, that would be a great achievement, and I think it is something that both countries are now striving for, and that is achievable.
Thank you. That also comes to, so you mentioned that you were part of the FTA summit when this year when in India. So after nearly 2 decades, the EU-India agreement is finally done. So what do you think? Is this the beginning of the new economic era or just the end of the negotiations? So what changes tomorrow in businesses?
Tomorrow, probably nothing. But I think it's both. Actually, it's of course an end to negotiations in which many people did not believe any longer. I mean, I think it was 13 years or so, and in my previous capacity, I was the South Asia Commissioner for the German Foreign Ministry, and I traveled to Brussels in 2023, and I remember one of the chief negotiators saying, it won't happen. It will never happen. It's too complicated. We can't reach it. And the reason that it has happened is, of course, the turbulences that we see in geopolitics that put pressure on both administrations and politicians on both sides. The Indian Prime Minister has made that very clear. Yeah, we're looking for friends in a time when others have become less reliable. And at the same time, we ourselves in the European Union have also seen that we need to diversify, seeing the threat, the weaponization of trade coming from China, and at the same time, the growing unreliability of other important partners. So in those times, we are looking to make agreements with India, but also with other countries in that region in particular, with ASEAN countries one by one, but it's in the long run also conceivable to have a region-to-region free trade agreement. We've just concluded with Australia, with Indonesia, last year with New Zealand, and we're negotiating Thailand, the Philippines and Malaysia at the moment. India is done, and as I said, jewel in the crown because of the scale. I mean, we are talking here about a growth of 4 billion euros per year, as the Commission appreciates. And von der Leyen said in New Delhi that it is feasible that our bilateral trade doubles by the year 2032. If we get there, that will be a lot of work, and implementation will not be easy on both sides, but I have the impression that the political pressure from the top on administrations in Brussels, in European capitals, 27 of them who have also to implement that, and in New Delhi is there, and perhaps more importantly, the belief is there that it is good for us.
Yeah. And that comes in the Stefan's presentation. He mentioned about India has been very protected towards manufacturing and agriculture sector. So Sujeet, so now the deal is done. Is India opening up with confidence, or cautiously will be testing the waters? Where will India still draw the red lines?
No, I think one of the biggest stumbling block during the 2 decades long negotiation was the agriculture sector for India, and rightly so, because it's such a massive political issue. You know, India still is an agrarian society. Only 13% of India's GDP comes from manufacturing. So it's one of the few societies that moved, lived from agriculture to service industry, almost bypassing the manufacturing sector, and we are paying the price for that as well. So no political party in India would take the gamble of, annoying the massive political base, which is the agriculture sector. So that was one of the biggest stumbling blocks, but thankfully that has been sorted out now, or at least the negotiations are over. And I think it's a matter of time, because before we actually have the outcome of the deal. Yes, there will be some give and take. And in terms of manufacturing, yes, there will be cheap European cars on Indian roads, and we'll have a lot of German machineries and whatnot. But actually that's good for India, because even today, German manufacturing is considered as the hallmark of quality. You ask any Indian and they will say that if it's German, it has to be the best quality. So that's something which is going to help build India's manufacturing sector and help our economy. Similarly, Indian exports tea, textiles, software services, pharma. These are all going to have wider market. I think that will add another 14–15% annually to the bilateral trade between India and Europe. So, I mean, it's the mother of all deals, as has been said. It's actually a win-win. It's actually one of those, FTAs which is win-win for both the parties. Yeah. So and everyone in India, and this has bipartisan support. When this happened, when the President of the European Commission was in New Delhi, the Indian Parliament was in session. And I was, in the House, and we had debate on this, and in both the houses of the Indian Parliament, members of parties from all parties, members of parliament from all political parties supported the deal. So we have bipartisan support in the country for this.
Yeah. Professor Straubhaar, I would like to talk to you about the values and interest. We have been talking about values, Madam Gupta also discussed. India and Europe are connected by shared values, democracy, liberal democracy. But in practice, partnerships, these days I see it's driven by interests. So when values and interests clash, for example, on trade policies and geopolitics, which one wins?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think this is the question that concerns me the most. This is the question about how can we build up trust again? And trust has something to do with values. And my whole life, I fight it for, let's say, the power of law and rules that somehow govern international transactions, trade, migration, foreign direct investments. And I learned the last years that within a night, this just collapsed. And so the question is, I mean, how can we go back to somehow a rule-based international exchange or partnership or cooperation, whatever it will be? And this definitely starts with values. And if we do not manage to somehow find common values, then I'm pessimistic about how we can keep our wealth and our, let's say, high standard of living worldwide. Even if I learned, and I mean, I knew it before, that there are still huge gaps, but still, even if we are not equal economically, no doubt that the last years of open markets has brought benefits to everybody worldwide. So, and this goes about values. And then the question was well asked, if we do not find common values, then we do not find common interests. And if we don't find common interests, there will be some kind of law of power. Sorry for that. I mean, don't worry. I mean, if we do not find common interests, then there will be national interests or party or somehow selected party-driven interests. And so I think this is the fundamental question. How can we trust each other? How can we build up on common values?
Very important. Stefan.
Yeah, I would like to add to that, because this was, for me, one of the most surprising results of our survey, was that in the case of Russia, it doesn't go together. It's not sharing values and trusts. So it's a lot about reliability. The experience that a friend is on your side for over a long time, and this Russia has been to India, and it's still in the mind of a lot of Indians. And about just with the beginning of this century, India reduced buying, diversified buying weapons and bought more from the US, and the relationship to the US started to improve. And it was over 20 years a continuous improvement of these relations until Trump came. And with introduction of these tariffs and also these very high fees on visa, this destroyed all the trust that had been built up over 20 years. So now, I mean, the Indians are, I think, masters in talking to everybody and this multi-alignment. So they would not say we don't talk with the US anymore. But the trust has been destroyed, and it will probably take another 20 years to rebuild it. And this is something we as Europeans should learn, that we cannot expect India to turn away from Russia from one day to another. We have to build trust over the next decades and be a long-term reliable partner to India. This is the best we can do. And India wants to become a developed country until its 100th anniversary of independence, 2047. So that means they ask for access to modern technology, not only in industrial production and manufacturing, but also in defense. So are we ready to open up and be a fair partner? And these are the interesting questions that we have to ask ourselves. Then over time, we will gain trust and become real friends.
So yeah, trust is the key here. Let me go to the security, Mr. Erik. When we say India-Europe security cooperation, it often sounds abstract. For what does it really mean? Is it safe supply chains, stable energy crisis? Is Europe comfortable with India becoming a manufacturing defense power? Or is Europe also comfortable in sharing the knowledge of manufacturing defense with India?
Yeah, I think that's a good question and follow up to what Stefan, I think, just said. It's all about trust, of course, and the fact that we signed a security and defense partnership in New Delhi in January is signaling this trust, and it wasn't easy. There were some member states in the discussions before that did not see the time come yet for such an agreement, and some of them that are closer to the Russian border and to Ukraine didn't see it because of India's certain special relationship in a way with Russia. But having discussed it for several months, in the end, the conclusion was, okay, I mean, there's only so many big partners that we could at least try to gain over partly or fully to our side, and India is one of them, so we go that way. And we are now negotiating a security of information agreement that is the precondition to exchange confidential information, so basically what the secret services know about, which means, again, we are ready to go these steps as soon as we get there in the end. Does it mean also that we would cooperate on arms procurement, on arms production? Well, I think yes. We see that just here from Schleswig-Holstein, a big business has been concluded or will be concluded with India for submarines. There is, of course, always this element, how much do we give, and are we risking to go into a trap like with China, seeing then India maybe rising in a few years from now to an extent where it is our biggest competitor. I think we have no choice. I think we must learn from the China example. There must be an equal footing. There must be conditions that make the Indian market and Indian knowledge as accessible to Europeans as the other way around. And I think that's also one of the preconditions for those new deals that has changed. I think 10 years ago, everybody, perhaps with a certain condescendency, always looked at India from here as the country that can largely benefit from us, and we are giving it something. Now I think it is very clear that in many areas also Europe can benefit a lot from cooperation with India, be it space, be it emerging technologies and computing and so on. And all of these topics were talked about in New Delhi also between Prime Minister Modi and President von der Leyen. Now for the security and defense partnership, I also can never remember because I also find it quite abstract as a concept, but it means basically a deeper cooperation in many fields, be it maritime security, be it cyber security, counterterrorism, joint exercises also. We have seen also Germany, but a few other European countries as well, sending Indo-Pacific deployments, as they were called, to the region, and very often they made a port call in India, or were participating in maneuvers with the Indian Marine and Army. And it means also, I think, rather in the future, space cooperation. But we are at that now, and I think it was a good image to put in on the first page of this. I mean, this is why we look at India, because it is modernizing and it is something that has something to offer to us, a country that has something to offer to us. But just to finish, I think the trust needs also knowledge, and comparing our knowledge about India with our knowledge about China easily shows that there's way too little India expertise in Germany, but also in Europe in general. We must work on that, and I would argue that there's also not enough Europe expertise in Indian policy circles especially. I mean, even I don't really understand Brussels, but I think it is very difficult for other governments to do that, and if we have a close partnership, we need to understand how it actually works.
Yeah. I would come to a migration, Professor Straubhaar. Germany clearly needs skilled labor. And but many times we feel that people in Germany still are not able to differentiate between asylum migration and the skilled labor migration. Economically speaking, does migration strengthen both the sides?
Yes, of course, but I think we have to be fair somehow and to look whether we may find some kind of win-win situations. Because first of all, I think migration and international migration is somehow characterized by a kind of asymmetry. And I'm now a little bit out of, let's say, cautious speaking, when I say that the higher developed countries would like to attract the most brilliant people, and let's say the lower developing areas would probably be interesting to send over the people that would not find jobs. Yes. Let's say it this way. I think this is still politically correct. So this is an asymmetry. So we have to talk about solutions where we could probably create a better world. And there are ideas around. And I mean, in practical world, there are ideas around. I mean, the most efficient Hamburgian or German consultants, banks, finance, transactions, insurances, whatever, they already somehow hire Indian, let's say, skills or workers or employees. But the idea is to have migration without mobility. And it leads to kind of cooperation that we should probably think in a world with digital transactions, with home offices, where it doesn't matter where you work, that you could probably deplace some of activities from here to there and give work to people in India, in other areas of the world, but in India specifically because the values, the language, the skills is there. So this is probably, this could be first steps also to build up trust and knowledge about each other, that we could probably think about have less bureaucracy, have less regulations, have the technology, the transactions, the networks to somehow stimulate this professional business operations and give people living in India a job that you will not find workers here in Germany for.
Thank you so much. I would, last question, maybe a brief one. You want to say?
I would just like to add here, preparing this today, I found a figure that I found really interesting. I mean, there's a shortage of 2 million STEM professionals, so the ones who are qualified in, very skilled in science, technology, energy, engineering, mathematics in the European Union, and 75% of our small and medium-sized enterprises report a shortage. They need these people. India does have these people, and I think we made a good step by also agreeing on a what's called a legal gateway office, which is a one-stop hub for such Indian professionals to come here in a safe and legal way. Professionals, researchers, students. But what you just said is very right. I mean, we also need to work on our own bureaucracy. I mean, it's hard to see how the numbers that we want would come here without knowing before what happens not only to the professional, but to his partner, to his children, where do they go to school, how do they find a flat. And Germany, I think, has been a bit of a front runner there. There have been initiatives by several of the German Länder to help, especially Indians, to find their way through the thicket of our bureaucracy. But I think we need that on a European scale, and that is very difficult to reach. So every pressure any one of you can make would be very important, I think.
Thank you so much.
Can I just...
yeah, okay. Yeah.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Sorry, I would love to actually chip in on the trust and value debate. You know, it's not necessary that if the values align, then you necessarily build trust with each other. The classic example is Indo-US. You know, arguably both India and US share the common values: democracy, rule of law, human rights, freedom of speech. India has been a democratic country right from the day it became independent. But for 50 long years, we didn't trust each other. And again, that's a separate debate. I'm not getting into that. And I always, jokes saying that when we were growing up in India in the 80s, even if there was a dead cow on the Indian streets, people would blame it on the CIA. So that was the level of mistrust that India and US had. And then in 2000, thanks to President Clinton, things started improving. I'm sorry. It took 25 years for India and US to build the trust. And then comes one gentleman. Overnight, the trust is gone. It takes long decades and years to build trust, even if you have the common values. And then, it can be gone in a day. Yes, Europe and India, the level of mistrust that we have today with the US is not there. That's why you have those numbers: 74% of Indians trust Europe, whereas only 15% Indians trust the US. The elephant in the room is, India, Russia. That's a different debate. If there is an inquiry, I would like to answer that, but that's a separate issue. Why India, is still friendly with Europe everywhere this question comes up. That's the elephant in the room. But I don't know if you have the time for that.
Yeah, I would like to open the forum for the audience. If there is any question, if you could just introduce yourself. Yes.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I have a question from trade policy perspectives. If EU and India, both Brussels and New Delhi, advocate free trade, why do we still see non-tariff barriers? For example, CE markings from the European side and the BIS markings or BIS certifications from the Indian side. Is it really about opening up or only testing the waters for the free trade agreement?
Eric, would you like to?
Yes, I think there's lots of things that need to be worked on in the future still. This free trade agreement is ambitious, but it is certainly not as ambitious as many other free trade agreements we have concluded. We have this agreement as it is now because we needed the political signal, and we also needed to make this first step. And if the expectations become true, that it's really 4 billion more per year and it's really doubling the trade until 32, I think that will ease up for other contentious issues that remain.
Thank you, everyone. So we have a member of parliament and we have Madam Consul General. Of course, they were right, and they respectfully disagreed with one point you mentioned, Professor. I would take the liberty to talk about it because I am not a diplomat and want to put it slightly differently in front of everyone. Okay. We were talking about alignment, right? Misalignment, and bear with me only for 30 seconds, not more than that. We're talking about alignments. What we have, actually what our MP also mentioned, in 1960s NAM and today, different political parties. India has two major political parties, both completely different in a lot of different discussions, topics, right? But one thing which every party is completely aligned on, that for India, it is not about alignment with a pole. As soon as you talk about multipolar, you are not talking about India. You know about India, but you are probably mistaken about the story of India here. India is multilateral. So we are talking about polars and multilaterals, completely different topic. India will have good relation with EU. India will have good relations with Russia. Let me give you a number which will make it a little bit clearer. Can you give me the name of the country which provides the maximum aviation fuel to Europe today? The maximum? Aviation fuel, refined oil. It is India. It is Russian crude. So, it is not about values, as our MP said already. It is more about where the alignments are in terms of your approach at that point.
If
and
you have any questions?
Yes, it is a remark.
You get into the point, yeah.
It is a remark, actually. Yeah. Because if we want to do business, we have to understand and we have to appreciate the differences between parties. It is not, yeah, please, sorry.
Should I just answer?
Sure.
Thank you very much. I think this is a misunderstanding. I was not talking about that if India becomes a pole, then they should somehow act with each other poles the same way. Or I didn't say something about what follows for politics and economics. What I said is, in the old world, it doesn't matter whether you are big or small. Because one country, one vote, independent of size and economic power. In the new world, it matters. And it matters whether you are big or small. If you are big, you can make the rules. If you are small, you have to take the rules. So easy. And that is all what I said. I didn't say that you have to somehow, of course, this is for me 100% clear that then you are going to work out a strategy for each of the poles to make most of, or that you can bring through most of your interests. That is my point. So I'm not going to say that India should be more closer to this or the other pole. That was not my point.
Thank you so much, Professor Straubhaar, for the clarification. Is there any other questions? Otherwise, I would like to, yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm Barnaby Dye from the German Council of Foreign Relations and also King's College London. Very interesting comments from the panel. So I was very intrigued by the survey results and then some of the comments being made about differences of opinion on some of the big geopolitical issues, obviously Russia perhaps most importantly. And this suggests to me a degree that there's perhaps a ceiling to the relationship as it currently stands. I wonder if you would agree on that. And then sort of my question is really what sort of relationship you think this will become. Is it one where there's particular opportunities you've outlined, whether that's on trade, on areas like space technology, or is this something sort of greater, as Mark Carney alluded to, the middle powers alignment of the moment of countries sort of outside of the US-China axis coming together and really forging something closer to an alliance? Do you see that sort of trajectory, or do you think it's going to be a bit more piecemeal, a bit more opportunistic, perhaps, in the areas where there is possibilities to collaborate? Thank you very much.
Would like to, yeah?
Well, I think the more ambitious we go about it, the farther we will get. Let's put it like that. I know that's not really an answer, but I think it depends on whether we will be able to align better with each other and to cooperate better in the international organizations. It is also part of the reality that very often our positions in the WTO, in the United Nations and other international fora have not been aligned so far, and we have not had prior consultation about where to go together. We have agreed on having such consultations now, and if that happens, and if we have the capacity to really say, okay, India has a position that we also understand, the European goes back to member states asking whether it can adapt its own position, or on the other hand, India sees that this is really a vital issue for the European Union, where we need to be not too far away, at least, and not hindering the intentions of Europe, then we might get there. And if we go also down the way of trying to set standards and norms together, then I think it is going way beyond just piecemeal cooperation from time to time. I think that is all on the cards, but it depends on the stamina that politicians on both sides will have.
Stefan?
Yeah, I wanted to add one point that we didn't touch clearly so far. That's about the relations India-Russia. We talked about the experience, the positive experience India had right after independence with Russia. We didn't talk about interests today. And there is also this aspect. And the worst case scenario for India would be a very close cooperation and access between Moscow and Beijing. That's the worst case that could happen from an Indian perspective. So keeping close relations with Russia and buying oil, buying weapons from them, receiving Putin and rolling out the red carpet. These are all measures to prevent a too close relation and cooperation of Russia and China against India. And this is very rational. So it has to do with this historic experience, but it also has to do with very specific interests of today.
Thank you, Stefan. I'm sorry, we have I would encourage all the, there's one more I can take.
Hi, thank you. Okay. Just a quick question. Is there anything related to semiconductors and deep tech collaborations as part of the FTA that the EU and the German companies are looking at? Because the Indian government, I think there's a mighty ministry that is pushing towards building up semiconductor manufacturing companies in India, and a lot of companies have really started investing there. So just wanted to understand from the EU FTA that we just signed, are there any investments that are happening?
You'd like to say?
Thank you.
Sure. Indeed, there is. In fact, I'm not sure about the specifics of the FTA with regards to semiconductor, but we have something called the India Semiconductor Mission, ISM. And as part of ISM, so we had ISM 1.0 and now 2.0, India is actively working with European partners. ASML is a classic example, you know, the Dutch company which manufactures high precision lithographic instruments. And both in fab and also in packaging, India is working. But the partnership is more with East Asia, with Taiwan and with Malaysia and with the South Korean companies. But definitely there is a German company as well which is working with one of the Indian partners for fab or for packaging. So it's definitely, semiconductor is a huge now focus area for the Prime Minister and for our government. So there's opportunity.
Thank you, Sujeet. I'm sorry if there is any other questions. The panelists are here. Sorry, my host is already asking the moderator. I'm sorry. As we close, let me leave the audience and the panel with one final thought. India and Europe don't have the luxury to misunderstand each other in this world of shifting power, fragile supply chains, and competing values. Partnership to define the future. So the real question is not that can India become Europe's best friend, but can Europe and India learn to trust each other in spite of differences? Thank you so much, everyone, for the very participative.